if your responsibility is the world, you don't care about national defence. It's not important to you because that's not your building block, that's not your unit.
And really nations shouldn't exist, and frontiers are a very bad old-fashioned primitive idea, and wouldn't it be just nice if we waved everybody through, and by the way, they will all be absolutely identical and we will have no problems at all, which suggests that perhaps we should look at one of the consequences, one of the very terrible consequences of this in the last day or two, the events of Bondi Beach.
Which are desperately sad and wicked, and it's very hard to work out what the causes are. There are evil people who believe things that are clearly wrong and clearly wicked, and there is a terrifying growth in anti-Semitism. That the formerly civilized world, the world we think of as civilized, has allowed anti-Semitism to creep back in, and something
creep is the wrong word, Jacob. It's
march back in.
Proudly, with banners flying.
Yes.
And again, sorry, you're using, forgive me, these cautious terms. You're using passive verbs.
Okay, I am. But
sorry, I am going to press you on this. I mean, the reason that there is anti-Semitism is because of this astonishing growth in the number of radicalized Muslims in the West, the extraordinary prominence of Gaza as an issue, the bizarre fact that the radical left, who of course disagree with Muslim traditionalists on everything apart from Gaza, have flung themselves into this.
Well, you see, I think it's as much to do, if not more to do, with the radical left than it is to do with Islam. I was really struck that the man on Bondi Beach who stopped the shooter was himself a Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe... I think we could quote passage from passage, the Bible, the Quran, saying really violent things. Actually, some of them we still have read out on the Vigil Mast at Easter Saturday. We always have the Pharaoh, his chariots and his horsemen being swallowed up by the Red Sea as an act of God, as a sort of thoroughly good thing that God should smite them. And the Quran has similar passages. But most Muslims, the overwhelming majority of Muslims, are no more likely to follow that wording than Christians are to follow the wording on stoning maidens caught in fornication.
Well, for the very good reason Jesus said that you don't. I mean, that is the slight difference, whereas there isn't that same repudiation.
Well,
No, Jesus, I think, I defer to your knowledge of Christianity, Jacob, but I think Jesus, I get these J words confused, but I think Jesus is exceedingly clear with the question of the woman taken in adultery.
He's clear with the woman taken in adultery, but he says, let he who is without sin cast the first stone, and then he tells her to go away and sin no more. Mm-hmm. So he's making it very clear that he is against sin, and he, of course, doesn't want to fight at the end. So he is much more pacific than Muhammad is, who is, of course, a war leader himself, and that's an important...
And Jesus' renunciation of worldly power.
Absolutely.
The great parable of the devil, the 30 days in the wilderness. And again, the fact that when the King of the Jews is put on the cross, this is, in fact, a mockery of everything that he had said.
Yes, but and I certainly... Jesus is not a figure of violence, but there aren't observant Jews who want to stone people either. If you purely take the Old Testament, and obviously they haven't had it completed, and Christ says, "I come to complete the law, not to overturn the law."
But although I suppose
I accept your point. It's not an unfair point, although the Book of Revelation is pretty violent as to what it expects is going to happen. But I think it is individuals who are to blame.
Of course.
Primarily. I think they draw on the texts because those texts give them sympathy, and there are states that sponsor it. And that state particularly is Iran. But it was Syria and it was Libya. Syria nominally secular under the Assads, and Libya very interesting because it was nominally Islamic, except the highest authority in Islam was, of course, Colonel Gaddafi. So it's sort of slightly confused. So I think it's very easy to blame Islam, but I don't think that's right.
So can I just stop you there? And forgive me in interrupting here. Are you saying then you think that the salience of Gaza and the rise of anti-Semitism has absolutely nothing to do with the scale of Muslim immigration? Because into Australia, into America, into Britain, into Western Europe. Because I would find that
no, I think
a
nothing,
wholly implausible
nothing would be
argument.
overstating it. I think that the degree of immigration and uncontrolled immigration has been very important. I think it's also created people who have come to this country and to Australia and to America and who then feel dispossessed. Very often second-generation immigrants feel uncomfortable in the country that they have come to and regret a romanticised ideal of what they have left behind. But again, I think that's more to do with human nature and to do with how people react to different circumstances than Islam. But I want to come back to the hard left, because the hard left have become anti-Semitic because they see Israel as part of an American, British, Israeli conspiracy to control the world, which they are fundamentally hostile to. That they want a very different world, they want a revolutionary socialist world, and that requires bringing down the American, British, Israeli axis. And so anything Israel does is, from their point of view, wrong, and that has gone from being criticism of the Israeli state to being anti-Semitism of a kind very similar to previous anti-Semitisms.
In other words, the international conspiracy
that's
stuff
right, that's absolutely right, yes.
of Hitler and the 1930s.
Which they clearly believe on the hard left. They think that is really what is going on. And they combine with and use, particularly in this country, the pro-Palestinian Muslim communities to try and bring those two together.
I wonder if there's other elements too, or the things that we need actually to introduce into that. The position that you're talking about now of an international Jewish conspiracy is, of course, by no means monopolized by the left. It's now become highly fashionable, I'm afraid to say, on the new right also. And I wonder if you're exaggerating that particular approach. You see, I think that the immense salience of Palestine, the immense salience of Gaza is due to something else, or rather, this is a kind of sideways argument, but still I think a very, very important one. It is the struggle for ultimate victimhood. Gaza has become the new genocide. It's why there's such immense determination to describe the Israeli intervention in Gaza as a genocide. If you like, going back to the Second World War, the idea of a Holocaust, of a genocide, became what I call the moral plimsoll line. What every argument in the new critical theory of victimhood, which is a secularized version of the Magnificat. You know, he shall cast the mighty down from their seats and exhort them of low degree. Black is good because it's victim, white is bad because it's superior, and so on. I think at every stage you can see a struggle for this and us are the Holocaust. We are the new Jews. Back in 2020, it was BLM. It was the whole Floyd business. This was the desperate attempt, again, even more unhistorical and even more flying in the face of the United Nations definitions of genocide, the attempt to claim slavery as the genocide and slavery, and as, of course, again, the new moral plimsoll line, which had, in exactly the same way that the Holocaust, the genocide of the 1930s, had delegitimated German history. Slavery was going to delegitimate Britain and America. The 1619 project, as the attempted, the American history only really begins with the first black slave landing there. And then I think that what we have now with Gaza being elevated into the new genocide is an attempt at, again, not simply delegitimating Israel, but the entire West. The whole, in other words, you get a kind of inversion of the world order, and again, I think that there's been an enormous failure to grasp the implications of this. Everybody concentrates on Trump's attack on the rules-based international order, but of course the radical left is infinitely more subversive.
Well, it wants to write the rules that stop the nation
invert
states doing anything, invert the rules.
Literally invert the rules.
But in a way, I think what's been going on in Gaza has been a proxy war that Israel has been fighting on behalf of the West, with Iran being the leading funder of Hamas, but also with Iran, Russia and China being fundamentally hostile to the Western order, and therefore encouraging this. China always very clever to keep its hands as clean as possible, and it fascinates me that North Korea sent lots of weapons to Russia. Did anyone really know that it had such an advanced economy to be able to do this? It's not something it could do without a nod and a wink from China, but China keeps its hands clean. And that is, I think, something we're facing. But again, you see, I end up saying this is not a specifically Muslim issue. It is an issue where other nation states are involved, one of which is a Muslim theocracy of a particularly nasty kind.
Again, I'm sorry, I am not entirely persuaded. Don't you think that the weekly processions, the violence of language, the universalize or whatever it is, the intifada, the attacks on synagogues, on individual Jews in New York, in London, in Sydney, in Melbourne.
Okay, I think the actual...
Do you not think that these have simply normalized anti-Semitism?
But these are not being carried out exclusively by any means by Muslims.
Please.
If you look at the crowds, there was a crowd outside the Home Office last night. Extraordinary of all the nights to be outside the Home Office protesting about Gaza. And a lot of them were elderly white women. There are a lot of silly people who have joined in on this.
But if you look at those great...
Jonathan Porritt, for heaven's sake, was...
Yes.
Who I've never thought of as a bad man. I agree with you, these marches legitimise anti-Semitism, normalise anti-Semitism. Where I'm disagreeing with you is that this is not a massive Muslim revival. It is...
Oh, come, Jacob, please.
A lot of silly people.
There are huge amounts, and the Dale Vinces.
And that's what makes up the numbers.
No.
I absolutely accept that the people who are most radical and carry out the murders have almost invariably been Muslim. That is a matter of fact. But I think the support they've got has come, and what has legitimised them has come from atheists, Christians, all sorts of people.
But also, again, let's just go back and look, look at nitty-gritty fact. If we look at those, particularly in the earlier part of this year, there were huge numbers bussed down for those demonstrations from the predominantly Muslim areas of the North and the Midlands. They were marching in black, as I'm afraid is the case. If you look at the direct sectarianism, the election of sectarian MPs, the salience of Gaza as an issue, again, all the surveys on the Muslim population. So I think that whereas I would agree with you that if you like, the emergence of this issue, not simply as a Muslim issue, not simply as a sectarian issue, requires the complicity of the idiot left. I think you are making a mistake in not seeing the deadliness of it, and I use that word very, very deliberately, as the combination of the two. I cannot conceivably see this issue assuming its salience without the major Muslim immigration. That is a necessary component of it. The use, in the same way, I cannot see slavery having become black rights having become the kind of issue that it was on the left, save for the presence of significant numbers of ex-slaves, black immigration into this country. So we're looking at, I think, Jacob, at a real phenomenon, which is a demographic phenomenon.
I think there are all sorts of problems with mass migration, but I think you've got to be very careful in differentiating I wonder about the taking the knee nonsense that we got. That just seemed to be American politics coming over here with no reference to whether our politics was at all like America's, or whether any of the circumstances that rise in America rise here.
But does that mean it's any of the less powerful? You see, if you look at...
I think we could have had the take the knee stuff, even if we had had a very, very small immigrant population in this country. I think it was an extraordinary... It was one of those madnesses that the British public get afflicted by, like when Diana, Princess of Wales, died and people were weeping in the streets. Periodically, the nation is overtaken by emotion and behaves.
Periodic fit. If you remember the Macaulay remark about nothing as ridiculous as the British people in one of their periodic fits of morality.
But I think what you're saying is right, but risks being simplistic. That yes, of course, if there were no Muslims in this country, zero Muslims, you would not have the one or two people who carry out these attacks, including the murder of David Amis and so on. I mean, these terrible things that have happened. On the other hand, we have a Muslim community here that is by and large not radicalized, and I think there's a risk of tarring them all with the same brush, which will make them more radical, because if you threaten a community, then they feel that they have to defend themselves, and therefore we've got to be really careful to recognize that the people who do it are dangerous individuals. Now, when you're setting up police screening programs, do you try and look at David Starkey and think that he's a dangerous person you need to prevent?
I'm sure they do.
Well, they did look at me,
exactly,
even when I was a minister.
Dangerous fondness for Kipling, you know, reads Edmund Burke.
Or do you look at a 20-year-old Muslim who you know spends all his time online? Well, absolutely, you have to devote resources to where you think the risk may be. But what you mustn't do is assume that the whole community is a risk, because the man who stopped the shooting was himself a Muslim. And that's really important. This is not, it's not all Muslims are terrorists.
Are you perhaps clutching at a very impressive straw in that all the shooters, I think, bar none in this area, who as it were, have claimed to be advancing the Muslim cause, are one form or another of radicalised Muslim.
Yeah, that's right.
That again, the Gulf states regarded as being fools in not outlawing the Muslim Brotherhood. They regarded as being fools in permitting the import of radical imams. If again, I'm sorry, I'm just giving you.
But all of that I agree with. All of that I agree with.
But it is very powerful counter-evidence, Jacob. And again, if you look back at the time of the Southport riots, the way in which entire Muslim areas, particularly the Jill Phillips business, turned out wearing black with sticks.
But Radical Banu was a Christian.
Pardon?
The Southport stabbings.
He
turned out to be Christian.
No, that's irrelevant.
But it's not, because there are bad people in all areas of life. If the problem was great, as you say, we would all be being murdered the whole time. Not that you'd be murdered more than once. The numbers of deeply radicalised threats are too small to blame the whole community.
No, I'm not blaming the whole community, but what I'm saying is that there is a highly specific problem, that were it not for the immigration, were it not for their concentration in specific constituencies, were it not for a particularly ideologized form of the religion, were it not for the fact that there is a group solidarity, again, the kind of work that Matt Goodwin has done, looking at the opinion of the broader Muslim community, shows, I'm afraid, A, the enormous salience of Gaza, B, the almost universal acceptance of what you and I would regard as anti-Semitism, and I'm afraid, Jacob, very much cutting against your argument, a high level of condoning of the violence. So, however there may be the exception of the hero, and let's give him his proper name, I think we need, and it's good that we disagree so strongly on this one, but I cannot accept your arguments, and I think they're wrong.
Okay, I think that you are accusing me of taking Ahmed al-Ahmed as typical of the community, and I'm accusing you of taking the murderers as typical of the community. And I would actually argue, we may even be able to agree on this, that they are both exceptional. And that I would also say that if you pressurize the community, you will make it worse. And if you look at Northern Ireland, Catholics who would never have got involved in violence at all sheltered the IRA because they thought their community was routinely being attacked. And likewise, Protestants defended the Protestant terrorists who got involved because they felt their community was under attack. I think as soon as you start blaming a whole community, you actually make the problem worse.
But we're already there, Jake.
But you have to focus.
But we're already there.
You have to focus, as always, on the individual, because that is what creates things. You're, dare I say, moving into left-wing territory by focusing on the collective.
No, I'm not. What I'm focusing on is how it is possible to break up the collective action. I mean, let's conclude with me daring you on this one. We had, once upon a time, a dangerous and radicalized religious minority in this country, closely associated with a foreign power called Roman Catholics. And we dealt with it, save in the beginning, without direct persecution, simply by two essential legal devices. One was a careful supervision of what priests were allowed into the country, and the other was the business of legislation. In other words, the proclaiming of intifada or fatwa or whatever. I wonder whether we need similarly strategic intervention. The Gulf states some of them seem very strongly of the view that we should, and indeed they practice it themselves. They control rigorously the religious, the institutional apparatus of Islam precisely to avoid this. We, from our liberalism, and you're the exact, I mean, you seem to me to have given a wonderful illustration of that natural liberalism that, dare I say, ends up in tolerating the intolerable rather than working out how to control it.
Well, as we're in your flat, I'll allow you the last word, but there is a good answer.
I think you should give it,
well,
because I'm a gentleman.
You are very kind. The answer is time. You see, the Catholics ceased to be a threat because if you take 1558, Elizabeth coming to the throne, Gunpowder Plot 1605, it all calms down because the young men grow old. The people who were staunch Catholics under Mary die. Their children forget. What we have to do is stop new immigration fully so that the problem doesn't keep on repeating. And time will allow the communities to settle. And people sitting here in 100 years' time will look back and say, isn't it amazing that we have managed to settle our differences, that the country is at ease with itself, as long as we don't carry on with this perpetual revolution of culture by having endless immigration.